The dust swirled across the desolate plains of Wyoming Territory as Noah Young rode through the valley, his once bright eyes now vacant as the endless sky above. It was 1874, 3 years since he'd last smiled, 3 years since he'd buried his family in the hard, unforgiving ground of the frontier. The sun beat down mercilessly as Noah guided his chestnut mare toward the small settlement of Pinecrest. His weathered Stetson cast a shadow over features that had once been handsome and open, now hardened by grief and the harsh elements of the West. At 32, he looked a decade older. Lines etched deep around his mouth and eyes, lines that had forgotten how to crease with laughter. "Come on, Sadie," he murmured to his horse, the only living creature he'd allowed close to him since the tragedy. "Just need supplies, then we're heading back to the ranch." The mare snorted in response, her hooves kicking up clouds of dust as they approached the collection of wooden buildings that constituted Pinecrest. It wasn't much a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a scattering of homes, but it was the closest thing to civilization for miles around. Noah's ranch lay 15 miles to the north, nestled against the foothills. Once, it had been a place of joy and promise. Now, it was just land he worked until exhaustion claimed him each night, allowing him brief respite from the memories that haunted his waking hours. As he approached the general store, he noticed an unfamiliar wagon parked outside. It was well maintained, but showed signs of a long journey. New arrivals weren't common in Pinecrest, especially not as winter approached. Noah paid it little mind as he dismounted and secured Sadie to the hitching post. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and Noah nodded curtly to Mr. Peterson. The shopkeeper who'd long since given up trying to engage him in anything beyond necessary conversation. "Afternoon, Noah," Peterson said, arranging a display of canned goods. "Your usual supplies?" "Yes," Noah replied, his voice rough from disuse. "And some extra coffee if you got it." "Just got a fresh shipment yesterday," Peterson smiled, "along with some new faces in town." Noah merely grunted in response, pulling his list from his pocket. He moved methodically through the store, gathering what he needed, when the bell jangled again. He didn't look up until a soft, unfamiliar voice broke the silence. "Excuse me, Mr. Peterson. I was wondering if my order of fabric had arrived yet." Noah turned slightly, catching sight of a woman he'd never seen before. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with auburn hair neatly pinned beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was practical but well made, the deep blue color bringing out the warmth in her eyes. "Miss Morgan?" "Yes, indeed. Came in on yesterday's supply wagon. Let me fetch it for you." Peterson bustled into the back room, leaving Noah and the stranger in awkward silence. The woman glanced at Noah, offering a polite smile. "Good afternoon," she said. Noah touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement but said nothing. Turning back to the shelf of ammunition he'd been examining, Peterson returned with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Here you are, Miss Morgan. 3 yards of calico and 2 of muslin, just as you requested." "Thank you," she replied, reaching for her purse. "And please call me Katherine. Miss Morgan makes me feel like my mother." "Katherine it is," Peterson chuckled. "How are you and your father settling in at the old Miller place?" "We're managing," she said, a hint of strain in her voice. "The cabin needs more work than we anticipated, but we'll have it ready before winter truly sets in." Noah listened despite himself. The Miller place had been abandoned for at least 2 years after the old man passed. It was a decent enough property, but isolated, sitting at the edge of the forest about 5 miles east of town. Peterson's voice lowered with concern. "It's a fine piece of land, but it's quite remote for just the 2 of you. Your father mentioned he's not been in the best health." "He's improving," Katherine said firmly. "The doctor in Denver recommended the mountain air. Once we're properly settled, I'm sure he'll regain his strength." Noah found himself watching her from the corner of his eye. There was determination in her posture, a quiet strength that seemed at odds with her delicate features. Her hands, he noticed, were not those of a woman who'd led an easy life. They showed signs of work, with a small burn scar on one wrist. "Well, you let us know if you need anything," Peterson was saying. "Folks around here help each other out." "That's very kind," she replied, gathering her package. As she turned to leave, her eyes met Noah's briefly. There was something in that gaze, an assessment, perhaps, or simple curiosity that made him look away first. The bell jangled again as she left, and Noah approached the counter with his supplies. "The Morgans moved in last week," Peterson said conversationally as he began tallying Noah's purchases. Katherine and her father, Thomas, came all the way from St. Louis. Here he was some kind of professor before his health failed. Noah remained silent, counting out coins from his worn leather wallet. Peterson sighed, recognizing the familiar wall Noah had built around himself. "She's been in here almost every day, getting supplies to fix up that old cabin. Determined young woman. Reminds me a bit of your Sarah, the way she—" "That'll be all," Noah cut him off sharply, his jaw tightening at the mention of his late wife's name. Peterson's face fell. "I'm sorry, Noah. I didn't mean to—" "Just wrap it up," Noah said, his voice flat and cold. The shopkeeper nodded, packing Noah's supplies with efficient movements. When everything was ready, Noah gathered the parcels and left without another word, the bell's cheerful jingle a jarring contrast to the darkness that had settled over him at the unwelcome reminder of his past. Outside, Noah secured his supplies to Sadie's saddle, his movements mechanical. The mention of Sarah had brought everything rushing back, the fever that had swept through their small homestead, taking first their 4-year-old son James, then Sarah, pregnant with their second child. 3 lives extinguished in the span of a week, leaving Noah alive but hollow. As he mounted Sadie, he caught sight of Katherine Morgan further down the street, speaking with the town's physician, Dr. Lambert. She gestured animatedly, her posture conveying urgency. The doctor nodded, patting her arm reassuringly before hurrying to his office. None of his concern, Noah reminded himself, turning Sadie toward home. He had enough troubles of his own without taking interest in newcomers who'd likely move on when they discovered how harsh frontier life could be. The journey back to his ranch passed in a blur of familiar scenery. Noah's mind wandered to the work awaiting him: fence repairs on the north pasture, preparations for winter, the small herd of cattle that provided his livelihood. Simple tasks that required physical effort but little thought, perfect for a man trying to outrun his memories. The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Once, the sight of the 2-story cabin with smoke curling from the chimney had filled Noah with pride and joy. Now it was merely shelter, a place to eat and sleep before beginning another day of existence. He stabled Sadie, unpacked his supplies, and set about his evening routine. A simple meal of beans and salt pork, eaten at the table where a family should have sat, dishes washed and put away. A pipe on the porch as darkness fell, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. In the early days after the tragedy, the neighbors had tried to help. Women from town brought food and offered to clean. Men came to assist with the ranch work. The pastor visited regularly, speaking of God's plan and the comfort of faith. Noah had endured their presence briefly, before making it clear he wanted to be left alone. Eventually, they stopped coming, and Noah retreated further into himself. He attended to business when necessary, paid his debts promptly, and kept to himself. The townspeople now regarded him with a mixture of pity and wariness, the tragic widower who'd turned to stone. As Noah prepared for bed that night, his thoughts unexpectedly turned to Katherine Morgan. There had been something in her eyes, not pity, which he'd grown to despise, but a kind of recognition, as if she too knew what it meant to carry a burden. He dismissed the thought as quickly as it had come. Katherine Morgan and her ailing father were nothing to him. Just new faces that would either adapt to frontier life or return east when winter showed its teeth. Noah extinguished the lamp and lay in darkness, awaiting the fitful sleep that was his only escape from the waking world's emptiness. The days passed, and Noah continued his solitary existence. October brought the first frost, painting the landscape with silver in the early mornings. He worked from dawn until dusk, preparing his ranch for the coming winter, allowing physical exhaustion to numb both body and mind. It was during one of his infrequent trips to town for supplies that Noah encountered Katherine Morgan again. He was loading sacks of flour into his wagon when he heard raised voices from the direction of the doctor's office. I'm sorry, Miss Morgan, but I can't leave my other patients. Mrs. Wilson's time is near, and there are 3 children down with fever at the Carson place. Katherine's voice was tense with barely controlled frustration. I understand your obligations, doctor, but my father's condition has worsened. The medicine you gave us isn't helping, and his breathing? Noah found himself listening despite his determination to remain uninvolved. He glanced over to see Katherine standing with Dr. Lambert on the physician's porch. Her face was pale with worry, her hands clasped tightly before her. I'll try to come tomorrow, the doctor was saying, his tone apologetic but firm. In the meantime, continue with the willow bark tea for the fever and keep him propped up to ease his breathing. Katherine nodded stiffly, her disappointment evident. Tomorrow, then. Thank you, doctor. She turned to leave, her shoulders squared with determination despite the setback. As she descended the steps, she caught sight of Noah watching her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the dusty street. Then, with a brief nod of acknowledgement, she continued on her way toward the general store. Noah returned to his task, securing the last of his supplies. He should simply leave, return to his ranch, and forget about Katherine Morgan and her troubles. It wasn't his concern if her father's health was failing. Everyone faced hardship on the frontier. It was the way of things. Yet as he climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins, he found himself hesitating. The image of Katherine's worried face lingered in his mind. He recalled Peterson's comment about the Morgan cabin being remote 5 miles from town, with winter approaching and a sick man to care for. Before he could reconsider, Noah guided his wagon down the street, stopping outside the general store just as Katherine emerged with a small parcel. She looked up at him in surprise. Mr. Young, isn't it? Noah nodded, uncomfortable with direct conversation after so long avoiding it. Heard you talking to the doctor, he said gruffly. Your father's unwell? Katherine's expression tightened. Yes, his lungs. The journey was hard on him. And now, she trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. But we'll manage. We always do. Noah hesitated, then spoke words that surprised even himself. I'm heading east. Could drop by your place, take a look at your father. Her eyes widened. You have medical knowledge? Some, Noah replied. Picked up things over the years, had to living out here. It wasn't entirely true. Sarah had been the one with healing knowledge, taught by her mother who'd been a midwife. Noah had watched and learned, never imagining he'd one day be offering such help to a stranger. Katherine studied him for a moment, clearly weighing her options. That's very kind of you, Mr. Young. I would appreciate any help you could offer. Noah nodded, gesturing to the wagon seat beside him. Climb up. We can be there in half an hour. She hesitated only briefly before accepting his hand and pulling herself up beside him. Noah was suddenly conscious of his rough appearance, the worn clothes, the beard he trimmed but didn't fully shave, the calloused hands that hadn't known a woman's touch in 3 years. They traveled in silence at first, the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the creak of wagon wheels the only sounds. Noah kept his eyes on the road, acutely aware of Katherine's presence beside him. She smelled faintly of lavender and soap, a clean, pleasant scent that seemed out of place in the wilderness. I appreciate this, Katherine said finally, breaking the silence. It's been challenging, being so far from town with father ill. Noah nodded, unsure how to respond to gratitude he wasn't convinced he deserved. Peterson mentioned you came from St. Louis. Yes, she confirmed. Father taught literature at the university there. When his health began to fail, the doctors recommended mountain air. We sold almost everything to purchase the Miller property. Long way to come on a doctor's recommendation, Noah observed. Katherine's hands tightened in her lap. We had other reasons to leave St. Louis. A fresh start seemed best for both of us. There was a story there, Noah realized, but he didn't press. Everyone in the West carried secrets, pasts they'd prefer to leave behind. It was an unspoken rule not to pry unless invited. The Miller place is good land, he said instead. Old man Miller kept it well. Cabin's solid. It needs work, Katherine admitted. The roof leaks in 3 places, and there's a draft coming through the north wall that I haven't been able to fix." Noah frowned. "Winter's coming. Need to get that sealed up." "I'm aware," she replied, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "I've been doing what I can, but carpentry isn't my strongest skill, and Father—" She trailed off, then shook her head. "We'll manage." The determination in her voice was familiar to Noah. It was the same stubborn pride that had kept him going when others might have given up. He recognized it because he lived it every day, the refusal to surrender, even when the fight seemed hopeless. They crested a small hill, and the Morgan property came into view below them. The cabin was indeed solid, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, but Noah immediately noticed the sagging portion of the roof Katherine had mentioned. Nearby stood a small barn and corral, currently occupied by a single horse and a milk cow. As they approached, the cabin door opened, and an older man appeared on the porch. He was tall but gaunt, his once powerful frame now bent with illness. Despite his obviously weakened condition, there was dignity in his bearing as he watched their approach. "Father," Katherine called as Noah brought the wagon to a halt, "this is Mr. Young. He's offered to help with your cough." Thomas Morgan's eyebrows rose slightly as he regarded Noah. "Very kind of you, sir," he said, his voice cultured but weakened by illness. A coughing fit interrupted his words, forcing him to grip the porch railing for support. Katherine was immediately at his side, her arm around his waist. "You shouldn't be out in the cold air," she chided gently. "Come back inside." Noah followed them into the cabin, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. The interior was modest but clean, with simple furniture arranged around a central fireplace. Books, dozens of them, occupied every available surface, speaking to the former professor's passion despite the limited space of frontier living. Katherine helped her father to a chair near the fire, wrapping a quilt around his shoulders. The older man's breathing was labored, each inhalation producing a concerning wheeze. "How long has he been like this?" Noah asked, setting his hat aside and approaching. "The cough began during our journey west," Katherine explained. "It worsened about 2 weeks ago, after a rainstorm caught him while he was repairing the corral." Noah knelt beside Thomas Morgan's chair, his eyes assessing. "Mind if I listen to your chest, sir?" The older man nodded, allowing Noah to place an ear against his back. The rattling sound within was unmistakable fluid in the lungs, a dangerous condition that had claimed many lives on the frontier. "Been coughing anything up?" Noah asked, straightening. "Some," Thomas admitted, "yellow in color, occasionally streaked with blood." Katherine's face paled at this information. "You didn't tell me about the blood, Father." "Didn't want to worry you more than necessary, my dear," he replied, patting her hand. Noah moved to the fireplace, thinking. Sarah had treated similar conditions with a mixture of herbs horehound for the cough, mullein to clear the lungs, and a touch of wild cherry bark to ease breathing. He'd gathered these plants himself under her instruction, learning where they grew and how to prepare them. "Got herbs at my ranch that might help," he said finally. "Tea that could clear your lungs some. Not a cure, but it might make breathing easier." Hope flickered in Katherine's eyes. "You'd be willing to share them?" Noah nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Can bring them tomorrow. For now." He looked around the cabin, noting the gaps between logs where the chinking had fallen away, allowing cold drafts to enter. "Need to seal up these walls. Cold air won't help his lungs." "I've been trying," Katherine said, gesturing to a bucket of clay and straw mixture in the corner. "But there's so much to do, and I can't leave Father alone for long." Noah studied the walls, calculating the work needed. "I can help with that, too. Got clay deposits on my land, better quality than what you're using, more adhesive." Thomas Morgan watched this exchange with interest, his academic's eyes observing more than Noah was comfortable with. "We wouldn't want to impose further on your kindness, Mr. Young," he said. "You must have your own responsibilities." "Ranch work's mostly done for the season," Noah replied with a shrug. "Got time." The truth was more complicated. Helping the Morgans would indeed take time away from his own tasks, but there was something in Katherine's determined struggle that resonated with him. Perhaps it was simply that assisting others would distract him from his own emptiness, give purpose to days that had become mere existence. "We can pay you," Katherine offered. "Not much, but—" "Don't need payment," Noah cut her off. "Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we survive." A smile touched Katherine's lips, transforming her worried face. "Then we accept with gratitude, neighbor." The word felt strange to Noah's ears. He hadn't considered himself anyone's neighbor in years, had deliberately isolated himself from such connections. Yet, here he was, offering help to strangers as if the walls he'd built around his heart hadn't become impenetrable. "I'll return tomorrow with the herbs," he said, reaching for his hat, "and materials to seal these walls." Katherine walked him to the door. "Thank you, Mr. Young. Truly." Noah nodded, uncomfortable with her sincere gratitude. As he stepped onto the porch, he noticed the wood pile beside the cabin far too small for the approaching winter. "You'll need more firewood," he observed. "Winters here are harsh." Katherine sighed, rubbing her arms against the autumn chill. "Another item on my endless list. The axe we brought is too dull, and I haven't had time to take it to the blacksmith in town." Noah glanced toward the forest that bordered the property. "Got a good axe. I'll cut some for you tomorrow." "Mr. Young," Katherine said softly, "why are you doing all this? You don't know us." The question caught Noah off guard. Why indeed was he suddenly involving himself in the problems of strangers when he'd spent 3 years avoiding human connection? "Winter's coming," he said finally, the simplest truth he could offer. "No one should freeze." With that, he settled his hat on his head and returned to his wagon, aware of Katherine's eyes following him as he drove away. The interaction had left him unsettled, stirring emotions he'd thought long buried beneath grief and isolation. As promised, Noah returned to the Morgan cabin the following day. His wagon carried clay for chinking the walls, herbs for Thomas's cough, and his best axe for cutting firewood. He'd risen before dawn to gather these supplies, driven by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Katherine met him outside, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Said I would," Noah replied simply, climbing down from the wagon. "Father had a difficult night," she explained, helping him unload. The coughing kept him awake. Noah nodded, extracting a small cloth pouch from his saddlebag. "Brew this into a tea, strong as he can stand it, 3 times daily." Katherine accepted the pouch, her fingers brushing his momentarily. "What's in it?" "Horehound, mullein, some wild cherry bark," Noah explained. "My wife—" He paused, the word feeling strange on his tongue after so long. "My late wife knew about such things. Taught me." It was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah to a stranger in years. The pain was still there, but somehow speaking of her in the context of helping others felt right, as if her knowledge living on was a form of honoring her memory. Katherine's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Young." Noah nodded curtly, unwilling to pursue the conversation further. "Should see to those walls," he said, turning toward the bucket of clay he'd brought. "Of course," Katherine replied. "I'll prepare Father's tea and then help you." As she disappeared into the cabin, Noah set to work examining the exterior walls. The chinking between logs had deteriorated in many places, creating drafts that would make the cabin nearly impossible to heat properly in winter. He mixed his clay with straw, creating a more durable compound than what Katherine had been using. He was pressing the mixture into a particularly large gap when Katherine emerged from the cabin, her sleeves rolled up and an apron protecting her dress. "Father's resting more comfortably already," she said. The tea seemed to ease his breathing almost immediately. Noah nodded, pleased but unsurprised. Sarah's remedies had always been effective. "Good. Show me how to do this properly," Katherine requested, gesturing to the clay mixture. "I want to learn." Noah hesitated, then demonstrated the technique, showing her how to press the clay firmly into the gaps and smooth it properly. Katherine proved a quick study, her delicate hands soon working as efficiently as his own. They worked side by side in companionable silence, moving around the cabin's exterior. Katherine occasionally asked questions about the process, but otherwise seemed content with the quiet, a quality Noah appreciated after years of avoiding the forced conversations that made his solitude so precious. By midday, they had sealed most of the critical gaps in the cabin's walls. Noah straightened, working the stiffness from his back as he surveyed their progress. "This should help significantly," Katherine said, wiping a smudge of clay from her cheek. "I can't thank you enough." Noah shrugged off her gratitude. "Need to let it dry before the next rain. I'll check the roof next." "Let me feed you first," Katherine insisted. "I've stew simmering, and Father should eat something as well." Noah wanted to refuse, to maintain the distance he'd cultivated for so long, but found himself nodding instead. The morning's work had left him hungry, and the smell emanating from the cabin was undeniably enticing. Inside, Thomas Morgan was seated in his chair by the fire, looking marginally better than the previous day. "Mr. Young," he greeted, "Katherine tells me your herbal remedy is already providing relief. You have my sincere gratitude." Noah nodded awkwardly, unused to such expressions of thanks. "Just an old frontier recipe. Nothing special." "On the contrary," Thomas said, his academic's mind evident even through his illness. "Folk medicine often contains wisdom modern physicians would do well to study. Your wife must have been a remarkable woman to possess such knowledge." Noah tensed at the mention of Sarah, but managed a curt nod. She was. Katherine, sensing his discomfort, intervened smoothly. "Lunch is ready. Father, would you like to eat at the table or by the fire?" "The table, my dear. I'm feeling somewhat stronger today." The meal was simple but well prepared, venison stew with roots and herbs, accompanied by cornbread still warm from the oven. Noah ate methodically at first, then with genuine appreciation as the flavors registered. It had been years since he'd eaten food prepared by someone else, years since he'd taken a meal at a proper table with company. Thomas Morgan, despite his illness, proved to be an engaging conversationalist. He spoke of books and ideas without condescension, seemingly genuinely interested in Noah's perspectives on frontier life. "You've been in Wyoming Territory long?" he asked between careful spoonfuls of stew. 5 years, Noah replied. "Came west after the war." "Ah, a veteran," Thomas nodded. "I was too old to serve, but I had many students who did. Brave young men." Noah said nothing. The war wasn't something he cared to discuss. Those years of blood and chaos best left buried with the men he'd fought alongside. "And your ranch," Thomas continued, respecting Noah's silence on the previous topic. "Katherine mentioned it some distance north of here." 15 miles, Noah confirmed. "In the foothills." "Quite isolated," Thomas observed, "though I suppose that's true of most homesteads in this territory." "Like the quiet," Noah said simply. Katherine, who had been listening to this exchange while serving the meal, spoke up. "Yet you've taken time away from your solitude to help us. It's extraordinarily kind." Noah shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "Just being neighborly." "Nevertheless," Thomas said, "we are in your debt. When my health improves, perhaps I might offer something in return. I brought a substantial library with me from St. Louis. You're welcome to borrow any volumes that interest you." Noah almost smiled at the offer, a professor's idea of valuable currency. "Don't have much time for reading," he said, though not unkindly. "Perhaps in winter," Katherine suggested, "when the snow limits outdoor work." The mention of winter reminded Noah of his purpose. After the meal, he examined the cabin's roof, identifying the source of the leaks Katherine had mentioned. The repair would require more extensive work than he could complete in one day. "Need to replace some shingles," he explained as he climbed down. "And reinforce that section there." He pointed to the northwest corner where the roof sagged slightly. Katherine's face fell. "Is it a difficult repair?" "Not difficult, just time-consuming," Noah assured her. "Need proper materials. Can bring them day after tomorrow." "We've already taken so much of your time," she protested. Noah shook his head. "Roof needs fixing before snow comes. Otherwise, you'll have bigger problems." He spent the remainder of the afternoon cutting firewood, the rhythm of the axe and the solid thunk as it bit into logs providing a familiar comfort. Katherine worked alongside him, stacking the split wood against the side of the cabin, her strength and endurance impressive for a woman raised in city comfort. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Noah split the final log and embedded his axe in the chopping block. "That should last a few weeks," he said, surveying the substantial pile they'd created. "I'll bring more when I return for the roof repairs." Katherine wiped her brow with the back of her hand, her cheeks flushed from exertion. "Mr. Young, I don't know how we can ever repay your kindness." Noah shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude after years of isolation. "No need. At least tell me your first name," she said. "If we're to be neighbors, Mr. Young seems overly formal." He hesitated, then relented. "Noah." She smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "Noah, then. And I'm Katherine, though most called me Kate before we came west." "Kate," he repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on his tongue. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with something Noah couldn't quite identify, a connection he hadn't sought, but couldn't entirely reject. It unsettled him, this tentative bridge to another human being after so long alone with his grief. "I should go," he said abruptly. "Daylight's fading." Kate nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. We've kept you far too long already." Noah gathered his tools and loaded them into his wagon. As he climbed onto the seat, Kate approached with a cloth-wrapped package. "Cornbread," she explained, "for your breakfast tomorrow." Noah accepted it awkwardly. "Thank you." "Day after tomorrow, then," she confirmed. "For the roof?" He nodded, taking up the reins. "I'll bring the materials." As he drove away, Noah glanced back once to see Kate still standing by the cabin, her figure silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the open door. Something stirred within him, a feeling so long absent he barely recognized it. Not happiness, not quite, but perhaps its distant relative. Purpose. That night, as Noah sat on his porch watching darkness claim the land, he found his thoughts continually returning to the Morgan cabin, to Thomas's quiet dignity despite his illness, to Kate's determined self-sufficiency, her refusal to surrender to circumstances that would have broken many, and to the strange fact that, for the first time in 3 years, he had spent an entire day thinking about someone other than his lost family. The cornbread sat on his table, wrapped in its cloth. Noah broke off a piece, the texture perfect, not too dry, not too crumbly. Sarah had never quite mastered cornbread. It had always been a source of good-natured teasing between them. The memory came without the usual crushing pain, a simple recollection rather than an open wound. Noah sat with this realization as he ate, wondering if this was what healing felt like, not the absence of grief, but its transformation into something that could be carried without being consumed by it. 2 days later, Noah returned to the Morgan cabin with a wagon loaded with roofing materials. The weather had turned colder, with a sharp wind from the north that promised an early winter. As he approached, he noticed Kate in the yard, struggling to secure a flapping piece of canvas over the woodpile. He pulled the wagon to a stop and quickly moved to help her, his larger frame easily managing what her slighter build could not. "Thank you," she said, breathless from exertion. "Everything's determined to blow away today." Noah nodded, looking toward the darkening northern sky. "Storm coming. Need to get that roof fixed before it hits." Kate's expression grew worried. "How long do we have?" "Day, maybe less," Noah assessed. "Should be enough time if we work quickly." They entered the cabin to find Thomas seated at the table, sorting through a collection of dried herbs. He looked better than during Noah's previous visit, still thin and pale, but with more energy in his movements. "Mr. Young," he greeted warmly. "Or may I call you Noah, as Katherine does?" "Noah's fine," he replied, removing his hat. "Katherine tells me we're in for some weather," Thomas said, gesturing toward the window where the wind rattled the glass. "Fortunate timing for our roof repairs?" "Need to start right away," Noah said. "Kate, I could use your help passing materials up to me." If she was surprised by his use of the familiar version of her name, she didn't show it. "Of course. Let me just make sure Father has everything he needs." While Kate attended to Thomas, Noah unloaded the wagon, arranging the materials for efficiency. He'd brought wooden shingles, nails, tar paper, and tools, everything needed to make the roof sound before winter's full fury descended. The work was challenging, especially with the strengthening wind, but Kate proved an able assistant. She handed up materials as needed, learned quickly how to position the ladder for maximum stability, and even climbed up herself to help with the simpler aspects of the repair. By mid-afternoon, they had replaced the damaged shingles and reinforced the sagging section. Noah applied tar to the seams, ensuring waterproof integrity even under heavy snow loads. "That should hold through winter," he said as they gathered the remaining materials. "No more leaks." Kate looked up at their handiwork with satisfaction. "I can't believe we finished in time. The sky looks positively threatening now." Indeed. The northern horizon had darkened to a slate gray, the wind carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching snow. Noah frowned as he assessed the storm's progress. "Need to get back before it hits," he said, loading his tools into the wagon. Kate touched his arm, her expression concerned. "Is that wise? The storm looks close, and 15 miles is a long journey in bad weather." Noah hesitated. The sensible course would be to wait out the storm at the Morgan cabin, but the thought of spending the night under someone else's roof, of extending his social interaction beyond the limited doses he'd allowed himself, made him uncomfortable. "Been through worse," he said, though doubt crept into his voice as he watched the rapidly darkening sky. Thomas Morgan had emerged onto the porch, wrapped in a heavy blanket. "Noah," he called over the rising wind. "I may be new to this territory, but even I can see that's not a storm to trifle with. We have space for you here." Noah looked between the approaching storm and the 15 miles of increasingly rough terrain that separated him from his ranch. Reluctantly, he acknowledged the wisdom in their concern. "Suppose I could wait it out," he conceded, "if it's no trouble." "No trouble at all," Kate assured him, relief evident in her voice. "I'll prepare dinner while you stable your horses." As Noah led his team toward the small barn, the first snowflakes began to fall large, wet flakes that promised significant accumulation. By the time he had the animals settled with feed and water, the snow was falling steadily, driven horizontally by the strengthening wind. The cabin welcomed him with warmth and light, a stark contrast to the gathering storm outside. Kate moved about the kitchen area, preparing a meal that smelled of herbs and roasting meat, while Thomas sat by the fire, reading aloud from a leather-bound volume. And so Odysseus replied to the Cyclops, "My name is Nobody, for that is what I am called by my mother, my father, and all my companions," Thomas recited, his academic's voice bringing the ancient text to life. He looked up as Noah entered, brushing snow from his coat. "Ah, Noah, just in time. I was reading the Odyssey to Katherine, a tradition we've maintained since she was a child." "Never read it," Noah admitted, hanging his coat by the door. "But you know the story of Odysseus?" Thomas inquired. Noah shook his head. Growing up on a hardscrabble farm in Tennessee, formal education had been limited to the basics, reading, writing, and enough arithmetic to avoid being cheated in business transactions. "Then you must allow me to continue," Thomas said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "Every man should know the tale of Odysseus, the warrior forced to wander far from home, facing trials and monsters before finding his way back to those he loves." There was something in the older man's tone, not condescension, but genuine enthusiasm for sharing knowledge that made Noah take the offered seat rather than retreating to a corner as he might have preferred. As Thomas read of Odysseus's cleverness in escaping the Cyclops' cave, Noah found himself drawn into the ancient tale despite his initial resistance. The story of a man fighting his way home against impossible odds resonated with him, though his own battle was not against external monsters but the demons of grief and guilt that had haunted him since Sarah and James's deaths. Kate moved quietly about the cabin, setting the table and tending to the meal, occasionally pausing to listen to a particularly dramatic passage. Outside, the storm intensified, snow and wind battering the newly repaired roof, but the cabin remained snug and warm. When Thomas paused to rest his voice, Kate announced that dinner was ready. The meal was simple but satisfying rabbit stew with dumplings, accompanied by preserved vegetables from the garden the Morgans had inherited with the property. "This is excellent," Noah said after his first few bites, the compliment escaping before he could consider it. Kate smiled, pleased. "Thank you. Mother insisted I learn to cook properly before she passed. Said a woman should know how to make a good meal from whatever was available." "Your mother sounds like a practical woman," Noah observed. "She was," Kate agreed, a touch of sadness in her voice. "She died when I was 16. Influenza." Noah nodded, understanding the loss without needing elaboration. Death was a familiar companion on the frontier, visiting homes without regard for worthiness or circumstances. "And you, Noah?" Thomas asked gently. "You mentioned a late wife. Do you have family elsewhere?" The question hung in the air, touching the wound Noah had protected for so long. In the past, he would have shut down such inquiry immediately, retreating behind the wall of his grief. But something about the warmth of the cabin, the honest interest in Thomas's eyes, and Kate's quiet presence made him answer. "Had a son," he said, his voice rough. "James. 4 years old when the fever took him. Sarah was expecting our second when he trailed off, unable to continue." Kate's hand moved across the table, not quite touching his, but close enough to offer silent support. "I'm so sorry, Noah." He nodded, accepting her sympathy without the usual resentment. "Been 3 years now." The Greeks believed that as long as someone remembered the dead and spoke their names, they were never truly gone, Thomas said softly. That memory itself was a form of immortality. Noah considered this, thinking of how he had preserved Sarah and James in his heart but refused to speak of them, as if sharing their memory might somehow diminish it. "James liked horses," he found himself saying. "Always wanted to help with them, even as a toddler. Sarah said he'd be riding before he could properly walk." The words felt strange on his tongue, but not painful like exercising a limb that had been immobilized for too long. Stiff, uncomfortable, but ultimately necessary for healing. Kate smiled, encouraging this small confidence. "He sounds like a wonderful boy." He was, Noah agreed, and was surprised to find the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Not quite a smile, but the closest he'd come to one in 3 years. After dinner, Thomas returned to his reading, the ancient tale of homecoming and redemption filling the cabin as the storm raged outside. Noah found himself drawn into the story, momentarily forgetting his isolation as Odysseus battled the sea god's wrath and the enchantress's spells. When Thomas's voice finally began to tire, Kate took the book from his hands. "That's enough for tonight, Father. You need to rest." Just when it was getting to the good part, Thomas protested mildly, but allowed her to help him to his feet. "Noah, I hope you'll forgive an old man retiring early. The bedroom is mine. But Katherine has prepared a pallet by the fire for you, and she'll take the loft." Noah nodded, uncomfortable again with their hospitality. "More than generous. Thank you." As Kate helped her father to the small bedroom partitioned off at the back of the cabin, Noah moved to the window, watching the snow accumulate in the yard. The storm showed no signs of abating. He would likely be here until morning at least. Kate returned to find him still at the window, lost in thought. "It's really coming down," she observed, standing beside him to peer into the darkness. "Be a foot deep by morning," Noah estimated. "Maybe more." "Will your animals be all right at your ranch?" she asked. "They'll manage. Got good shelter, plenty of feed." Kate nodded, then moved to the fire, adding another log. "I've made up your bed here," she said, gesturing to a pallet of blankets arranged near the hearth. "It's not much, but it should be warm enough." "More comfortable than many places I've slept," Noah assured her. A moment of awkward silence stretched between them, neither quite sure how to navigate this unexpected intimacy of sharing shelter through the long night. "Thank you," Kate said finally, "for the roof, the firewood, Father's medicine, for everything." Noah shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "Just being neighborly." "Is that all it is?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face in the firelight. The question caught him off guard, forcing him to consider his own motivations. Why had he, after 3 years of deliberate isolation, suddenly involved himself in the struggles of strangers. What had drawn him to this cabin, to this woman and her ailing father? "Don't know," he admitted finally. "Been alone a long time. Maybe that's long enough." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Kate. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened with understanding. "Sometimes I think loneliness is the true wilderness," she said, "more daunting than any mountain or forest." Noah nodded, unable to articulate how precisely she had named the empty terrain he'd wandered since losing his family. "Should get some rest," he said, retreating from the moment of vulnerability. Kate seemed to understand his need to withdraw. "Of course. Good night, Noah." "Good night, Kate." As she climbed the ladder to the loft, Noah settled onto the pallet by the fire, listening to the storm's fury outside and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. For the first time in years, he was sleeping under a roof not his own, in the presence of people who were slowly, impossibly beginning to matter to him. The thought should have terrified him, this tentative reconnection to the world of the living. Instead, as sleep claimed him, Noah felt something like peace. Morning brought a transformed world, blanketed in white silence. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind nearly 2 feet of pristine snow that glittered in the early sunlight. Noah woke to the smell of coffee and the quiet sounds of Kate moving about the kitchen. "Morning," she greeted as he sat up. "Father's still sleeping." The storm seemed to ease his breathing somehow, perhaps the change in air pressure. Noah nodded, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Snow this early means a hard winter ahead," he observed, looking out the window at the dazzling whiteness. "Will you be able to make it back to your ranch?" Kate asked, concern evident in her voice. "Trail will be difficult but passable," Noah replied. "Should leave soon while the day is still young." Kate nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across her features. "Of course. I've prepared some breakfast for you before you go." They ate in companionable silence, eggs with the last of the previous night's cornbread. Thomas emerged as they were finishing, looking more rested than Noah had yet seen him. "Quite a storm," the older man observed, accepting the cup of coffee Kate poured for him. "I trust you slept well, Noah." "Yes, sir. Thank you for the shelter." Thomas waved away his thanks. "The least we could offer after all your help. Will you be returning to your ranch today?" Noah nodded. "Need to check on my stock." "Of course," Thomas agreed, "but I hope we'll see you again before too long. I've quite enjoyed our conversations." The sincere warmth in the old professor's voice touched Noah unexpectedly. He had forgotten what it felt like to be welcomed, to have his company genuinely desired, rather than merely tolerated, out of frontier politeness. "Could come back in a few days," Noah found himself offering. "Bring more firewood, check how the roof held up." "We'd like that," Kate said, her smile lighting her face in a way that made Noah suddenly conscious of his unshaven jaw and rumpled appearance. After breakfast, Noah prepared for departure, checking his horses and loading his remaining tools into the wagon. Kate followed him outside, wrapped in a heavy shawl against the cold. "The journey will be difficult in this snow," she said, watching as he hitched the team. "Please be careful." "Always am," Noah replied, though her concern warmed him in a way the bright winter sun could not. As he climbed onto the wagon seat, Kate suddenly stepped forward. "Wait," she said, reaching into her pocket and extracting a small object. "I want you to have this." She pressed a small leather pouch into his hand. Noah opened it to find a simple medallion on a leather cord, St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers. "It was my mother's," Kate explained. "She always said it would protect those on difficult journeys." Noah stared at the gift, overwhelmed by its significance. "I can't take this," he protested. "It's your memory of her." "I have many," Kate said firmly, "and I'd feel better knowing you carry it. Please." Unable to refuse in the face of her earnest expression, Noah slipped the cord around his neck, tucking the medallion beneath his shirt. "Thank you," he said gruffly. "I'll return soon." Kate nodded, stepping back from the wagon. "We'll be waiting." As Noah guided his team through the deep snow, he was acutely conscious of the medallion resting against his chest, a tangible connection to Kate that he would carry with him back to his solitary ranch. It had been so long since anyone had worried about his safety, since anyone had cared whether he returned safely from a journey. The trail was indeed difficult, with drifts that sometimes reached the horses' chests, but Noah's experienced handling saw him through the worst patches. By mid-afternoon, he crested the final hill that overlooked his ranch, the familiar buildings appearing small and somehow lonelier than when he'd left. The stock had weathered the storm well, sheltered in the barn as he'd anticipated. Noah tended to them methodically, his mind still partly back at the Morgan cabin with its warm fire and the sound of Thomas's voice bringing ancient heroes to life. That evening, as he sat alone on his porch despite the cold, Noah found himself turning Kate's medallion between his fingers, the metal warming with his touch. 3 days ago, he would have said he preferred his solitude, that the emptiness of his existence was a fitting penance for having survived when his family did not. Now, with the memory of Kate's smile and Thomas's storytelling fresh in his mind, the silence of his ranch seemed less like peace and more like absence. True to his word, Noah returned to the Morgan cabin 4 days later with a wagon full of split firewood. The snow had settled somewhat, making travel easier, though the cold had intensified, turning the world brittle and sharp. Kate met him in the yard, her face lighting with genuine pleasure at his arrival. "Noah, we were beginning to worry the snow had made travel impossible." "Takes more than snow to keep me homebound," he replied, jumping down from the wagon. "How's your father?" "Improving daily," she said, helping him unload the firewood. "Your herbal remedy has worked wonders. He's even been taking short walks around the cabin when the sun is high." Noah nodded, pleased. "Good. Winter illness can be dangerous out here." They worked together to stack the wood against the cabin wall, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Noah noticed that Kate had hung canvas above the woodpile, creating a shelter to keep the worst of the snow off, a small but significant improvement that showed her adaptability to frontier life. Inside, Thomas was seated at the table, several books open before him, making notes in a leather-bound journal. He looked up with a broad smile as Noah entered. "Ah, our neighbor returns. Welcome, Noah. I was just preparing some lectures for when I'm well enough to teach again." Noah removed his hat, curious despite himself. "Thought you retired from teaching." "From the university, yes," Thomas confirmed, "but not from education itself. I've spoken with Reverend Mitchell in town about offering some classes for the children of Pinecrest. Many have limited access to formal education out here." "That's true enough," Noah acknowledged. "Most frontier children learned practical skills from their parents, but had little opportunity for book learning beyond basic literacy." "Father believes education shouldn't be limited by geography," Kate explained, preparing coffee at the stove. "It's partly why we brought so many books west with us." "Knowledge is the great equalizer," Thomas said passionately. "A person with access to books is never truly isolated, never without resources." There was something infectious about the older man's enthusiasm, a reminder of a world beyond the immediate concerns of survival that dominated frontier existence. Noah found himself drawn into conversation about Thomas's plans for a small school in Pinecrest, offering practical suggestions about which families might participate, and the challenges of winter transportation for children from outlying homesteads. As they talked, Kate moved about the cabin, preparing a meal and occasionally contributing to the discussion. Noah was struck by the easy domesticity of the scene, so different from the stark silence of his own home. After a hearty lunch, Thomas retired for his afternoon rest, leaving Noah and Kate alone by the fire. The intimacy of the moment made Noah uncharacteristically self-conscious, aware of Kate in a way that went beyond mere appreciation of her competence and kindness. "I've been meaning to ask," Kate said, breaking the silence. "Why did you really come to our aid that first day? And please don't say it was just being neighborly." Noah stared into the fire, considering his answer. The truth was complex, a mixture of motives he was only beginning to understand himself. "Reminded me of something," he said finally. "What?" Kate prompted gently. Noah sighed, the words coming reluctantly. "When Sarah and I first came west, everything was a struggle. Cabin to build, land to clear, weather to endure. Neighbors helped us through that first winter. Man named Harker especially brought us food when game was scarce, helped me fell trees for our cabin. Kate listened attentively, her eyes never leaving his face as he spoke of the past he'd kept buried for so long. When I saw you struggling with that cabin, with your father ill, reminded me of those days, of what it means to need help and receive it. And perhaps what it means to give help as well, Kate suggested softly. Noah nodded, uncomfortable with her perception. Maybe. Been a long time since I felt useful to anyone. You've been more than useful to us, Noah. You've been our salvation. Kate's voice held a warmth that reached places in Noah that had been cold for years. I think perhaps we needed each other. The simplicity of her observation struck Noah with the force of revelation. Perhaps his help to the Morgans wasn't merely charity or neighborly duty, but a mutual exchange, he offering practical assistance while they provided something he'd been missing without even realizing its absence. Human connection, purpose beyond mere survival. Maybe so, he acknowledged, meeting her gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding. A recognition of shared need and growing attachment that neither had anticipated when they first met in Peterson's store. Noah left before dark, the short winter day dictating his departure, but with a promise to return in 3 days with more supplies from town. As he drove away, he touched the St. Christopher medallion beneath his shirt, a talisman not just of safe travel but of connection to the woman who had given it. The following weeks established a pattern. Noah would visit the Morgan cabin every few days, bringing supplies, checking on repairs, and ensuring they had sufficient firewood. Each visit lengthened, his reluctance to leave growing more pronounced as winter deepened around them. Thomas continued to improve, regaining strength as his lungs cleared. He often read aloud during Noah's visits, not just the Odyssey now, but other works from his extensive library. Through these readings, Noah discovered a hunger for knowledge he'd never fully acknowledged, a curiosity about the world beyond Wyoming Territory that had lain dormant during his years of grief-imposed isolation. Kate, meanwhile, had begun transforming the cabin into a true home. Curtains appeared at the windows, made from fabric purchased on Noah's supply runs to town. A braided rug brightened the plank floor. Small touches of beauty emerged amid the frontier practicality, dried flowers arranged in a pottery vase, hand-carved wooden spoons hanging by the stove, a patchwork quilt draped across the back of Thomas's chair. Noah found himself noticing these changes, appreciating the way Kate created warmth and comfort with limited resources. It reminded him of Sarah's efforts in their early years together, though Kate's style was distinctly her own, more ordered perhaps, reflecting her city upbringing, but no less determined. As December arrived, bringing the full force of Wyoming winter, Noah faced a decision. The heavy snows would soon make regular travel between his ranch and the Morgan cabin increasingly dangerous. Already, the journey took twice as long as it had in autumn, with drifts sometimes requiring him to break trail for the horses. During one particularly difficult return journey, with night falling and the temperature dropping dangerously, Noah realized he could no longer justify these trips solely for the pleasure of the Morgans' company. Either he must reduce his visits to essential supply runs only, or the alternative occurred to him as he struggled through a particularly deep snowdrift. He could invite the Morgans to winter at his ranch. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and appealing. His home had been his sanctuary and his prison for 3 years, the place where he nursed his grief in solitude. Opening it to others meant acknowledging that his period of isolation was ending, that he was ready to rejoin the world of the living. By the time he reached his ranch, half frozen and exhausted from the difficult journey, Noah had made his decision. The next day, he would offer the Morgans shelter for the remainder of winter. His ranch was larger, better constructed, and had ample room for 3 people to live comfortably until spring thaw made travel easier. 3 days later, when the weather cleared enough for safe travel, Noah returned to the Morgan cabin with his proposal. Kate listened with surprise as he outlined his concerns about their safety in the increasingly harsh winter conditions. "Your cabin's sound enough," he explained, "but it's isolated. If Thomas's health should worsen, or if you run into trouble, you're 5 miles from the nearest help." "And your ranch is 15 miles from town," Kate pointed out, though her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "True," Noah acknowledged, "but my place is larger, better insulated. Got a proper barn for your horse and cow. Plenty of room for the 3 of us. Come spring, you can return here if you choose." Kate studied him, her eyes searching his face. "This is a significant offer, Noah. Are you certain you want to share your home after so long alone?" The question cut to the heart of his decision, forcing him to articulate what he had only recently admitted to himself. "Not sure 'want' is the right word," he said honestly, "but it's the right thing to do. And," he hesitated, then continued, "being alone isn't what it used to be." Understanding softened Kate's expression. "Let me discuss it with Father," she said. "It's a major upheaval for him, especially with his health still fragile." Noah nodded, preparing himself for refusal. The Morgans had their pride, after all, and accepting such charity wasn't easy for independent people. To his surprise, Thomas readily agreed to the plan when Kate presented it over dinner. "A sensible solution," the older man declared. "This cabin has served us well enough for the autumn, but Noah's right about the isolation. One heavy storm could cut us off completely." "You're sure you wouldn't mind the disruption?" Kate asked Noah, hope and concern mingled in her expression. "Wouldn't have offered if I minded," he replied simply. And so it was decided. They would leave the following morning, taking only what they needed for winter clothing, Thomas's essential books, Kate's sewing materials, and personal items. The cabin would be secured until spring, with hay stored for the journey back to feed the animals they would bring with them. That night, as Noah prepared for sleep on his usual pallet by the fire, he found himself both anxious and strangely peaceful about the change coming to his life. For 3 years, he had existed in self-imposed exile, using grief as a shield against the pain of human connection. Now he was voluntarily opening his home to virtual strangers, inviting them into the private space where he had nursed his wounds. Yet, as he watched Kate move about the cabin, preparing for tomorrow's journey with quiet efficiency, Noah realized these people were no longer strangers. Somehow, in the weeks since he'd first offered help, the Morgans had become important to him. Thomas with his books and ideas, Kate with her strength and gentle persistence, and Kate. Noah turned away from watching her, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. Kate had become something he hadn't anticipated, a presence that lingered in his mind during the days when he was at his ranch alone. Her smile, her voice, the way she listened when he spoke as if his words mattered, these things had begun to occupy his thoughts in ways that both troubled and intrigued him. Tomorrow they would become part of his daily life, sharing his home, his table, his routine. The prospect was daunting, yet undeniably appealing an end to the crushing solitude that had been both his punishment and his refuge. As Noah drifted toward sleep, his hand found the St. Christopher medallion still hanging around his neck. He hadn't removed it since Kate had given it to him, its weight a constant reminder of the connection forming between them, a connection he was only beginning to understand and wasn't entirely sure he deserved. The journey to Noah's ranch the following day was arduous but uneventful. They traveled in a small caravan, Noah's wagon carrying Thomas and most of their belongings, Kate riding her horse alongside, and their milk cow tethered behind. The snow was deep in places, requiring frequent stops to break trail, but the clear winter sky and lack of wind made the trip bearable. As they crested the final hill overlooking Noah's property in the late afternoon, Kate reined her horse alongside the wagon. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the 2-story cabin nestled against the pine-covered foothills, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A large barn stood nearby, with corrals and outbuildings arranged in a practical pattern. Unlike many frontier homesteads, Noah's ranch had a finished, established quality, the work of years rather than months. "Built most of it myself," Noah said, unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. Had help with the barn raising, but the cabin was my doing. It's impressive, Kate said sincerely. You must have worked incredibly hard. Noah nodded, memories of those early days with Sarah rising unbidden, the long hours of labor, the satisfaction of creating something permanent in this wild country, the shared exhaustion and pride as their home took shape. Worth the effort, he said simply. Thomas, bundled in blankets in the wagon bed, roused himself to appreciate the view. Reminds me of paintings I've seen of alpine homesteads, he observed. Sturdy, practical, yet not without beauty. Noah guided the wagon down the slope toward the ranch, oddly pleased by their appreciation of his home. It had been so long since he'd seen it through fresh eyes, recognizing what he had built rather than focusing on what he had lost within its walls. The next hour was occupied with practical matters, stabling the animals, unloading belongings, and showing the Morgans the layout of the cabin. Noah had spent the days before his journey to their place preparing for their arrival, cleaning rooms that had been unused for years and airing out bedding that had been stored since Sarah's death. This was our guest room, he explained, showing Kate to a small but comfortable bedroom on the first floor. Thomas can use it. Thought you might prefer the loft, more privacy. The loft was a spacious area under the peaked roof, originally intended as a sleeping space for children. Noah had built it when Sarah was expecting James, creating a cozy nook with dormer windows that offered views of the surrounding countryside. It had remained untouched since James's death, preserved like a museum to what might have been. It's lovely, Kate said softly, taking in the simple furnishings and the homemade quilt on the bed, Sarah's work. Though Noah didn't mention this. Are you certain you're comfortable with me using this space? It seems personal. Noah nodded, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. Time it was used again, he said. Been empty too long. Kate seemed to understand the significance of this gesture, reaching out to touch his arm briefly. Thank you, Noah. I'll take good care of it. By evening, the Morgans were settled in their respective rooms, and Noah had prepared a simple meal of venison stew and biscuits. As they sat around his table, a table that had known only solitary meals for 3 years, Noah experienced a strange sensation of his home coming alive again, as if the cabin itself welcomed the voices and movement after so long in mourning. That night, lying in his bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people moving about his home, Noah fought against conflicting emotions. Part of him recoiled from this invasion of his solitude, this disruption of the controlled emptiness he had maintained. But another part, a part he had thought long dead, responded to the simple human comfort of shared space, of knowing he was not alone in the darkness. The following days required adjustment for all of them as they established a routine that accommodated each person's needs and habits. Noah, accustomed to working according to his own schedule, found himself adapting to meal times that considered Thomas's health and Kate's household responsibilities. The Morgans, in turn, were careful to respect Noah's privacy, giving him space when he retreated to his workshop or took long rides to check his cattle in the distant pastures. Thomas established a study area near the fireplace, arranging his books and papers with academic precision. He continued working on his lectures for the children of Pinecrest, occasionally reading passages aloud to Noah and Kate in the evenings, seeking their opinions on whether the material would engage young frontier minds. Kate assumed responsibility for much of the household management, insisting it was a fair exchange for the shelter Noah provided. She proved to be an excellent cook, transforming simple ingredients into meals that reminded Noah of what he had been missing in his years of bachelor existence. More than that, she brought order and comfort to rooms that had been merely functional for too long, placing wildflowers on the table even in winter, dried arrangements she created from summer blooms she'd gathered, rearranging furniture for better conversation, adding small touches that made the cabin feel like a home again. For Noah, these changes were both welcome and disorienting. He found himself lingering over meals rather than eating quickly and returning to work. In the evenings, he joined Thomas and Kate by the fire, listening to Thomas's readings or engaging in conversations that ranged from practical matters of ranching to abstract discussions of literature and philosophy. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rigid shell he had built around himself began to crack, allowing glimpses of the man he had been before tragedy struck. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories that Noah had suppressed for 3 years. The holiday had been Sarah's favorite, a time when she filled their home with simple decorations and baked treats despite the frontier limitations. Since her death, Noah had ignored the day entirely, working through it as if it were any other. Kate, however, clearly had other ideas. 2 weeks before Christmas, Noah returned from checking cattle to find pine boughs arranged along the mantelpiece, their fresh scent filling the cabin. "Hope you don't mind," Kate said, noticing his surprise as he hung his coat by the door. "Father and I thought some holiday cheer might be welcome." Noah stared at the greenery, waiting for the pain that usually accompanied such reminders of Sarah. To his surprise, what came instead was a bittersweet memory of her delight in similar decorations, a memory that ached but didn't devastate. "It's fine," he said, his voice gruff but not angry. "Sarah used to do something similar." Kate's expression softened at this rare mention of his late wife. "Would you rather I remove them? I don't want to cause painful memories." Noah shook his head. "Leave them. It's good to remember sometimes." Over the following days, more holiday touches appeared around the cabin, red berries among the pine boughs, candles placed in the windows, a small wreath on the front door. Noah watched these transformations with a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite name, allowing Kate's gentle restoration of traditions he had abandoned. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside, the three of them gathered by the fire after dinner. Thomas, who had been mysteriously occupied in his room for several days, presented them each with a gift hand-bound books containing his own transcriptions of stories and poems he thought they would enjoy. "It's not much," he apologized, "but out here, words may be the most valuable gift I have to offer." Noah held his book with unexpected emotion, running his fingers over the careful binding and neat script. "Never received anything like this," he said honestly. "Thank you." Kate had also prepared gifts for Thomas, a new scarf she had knitted during the long evenings, for Noah, a leather vest she had repaired and embellished with subtle designs along the edges. "I noticed your old one was wearing through at the shoulders," she explained as he examined her handiwork. "This one belonged to my late uncle, but it should fit you well enough." Noah, who hadn't anticipated receiving gifts and thus had prepared none, felt momentarily at a loss. Then, making a sudden decision, he rose and went to a cabinet that had remained locked since the Morgans' arrival. From it, he removed a small wooden box and returned to the fireside. "Not properly wrapped," he said awkwardly, holding the box out to Kate. "But seems right you should have this." Kate opened the box carefully to reveal a silver hairbrush and hand mirror, their surfaces engraved with a delicate pattern of flowers. "Noah," she breathed, lifting the brush reverently. "These are beautiful." "Were Sarah's," he said, his voice low. "Her mother's before that. Been sitting in that cabinet for 3 years. Should be used, not hidden away." Kate's eyes filled with tears at the significance of the gift. "Are you certain? This is a family heirloom." Noah nodded, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't express. "You've brought life back to this house," he said simply. "Seems fitting." The moment hung between them, charged with meaning that went beyond the simple exchange of Christmas gifts. In offering Kate something that had belonged to Sarah, Noah was acknowledging a truth he had been approaching gradually over the weeks of their shared living arrangement, that his heart, so long closed in grief, was opening again to possibilities he had thought forever lost to him. For Thomas, he retrieved a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare's works that had been Sarah's favorite reading. "Figure a professor ought to have a complete Shakespeare," he said, offering the book with less ceremony but equal sincerity. Thomas accepted it with genuine appreciation, recognizing both the quality of the edition and the personal significance of Noah sharing these tangible connections to his past. That night, as Noah lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of the cabin settling around him, he realized something profound had shifted within him. The pain of his loss hadn't vanished, would never vanish completely, but it had transformed from a consuming fire to a gentler warmth, a memory that could comfort rather than destroy. And much of that transformation, he acknowledged, was due to the woman sleeping in the loft above Kate. With her quiet strength and persistent kindness, who had respected his grief while gradually, inexorably, drawing him back into the world of the living. The realization should have frightened him, this growing attachment to someone new. Instead, Noah found himself filled with a cautious hope he had thought never to feel again, hope that perhaps his life wasn't over after all, that there might still be joy to be found, if he had the courage to reach for it. January brought the deepest cold of the Wyoming winter, with temperatures that made the snow squeak underfoot and froze water buckets solid overnight. The three inhabitants of Noah's ranch settled into a comfortable routine, each finding their place in the shared household. Thomas continued to improve, the combination of Kate's care and the herbal remedies Noah prepared, strengthening his lungs against the winter air. He spent his days writing, reading, and planning his future educational endeavors in Pinecrest, occasionally venturing outside on milder days to experience the crisp beauty of the snow-covered landscape. Kate managed the household with quiet efficiency, transforming Noah's functional bachelor existence into something far more comfortable. She baked bread twice weekly, maintained a perpetual pot of soup or stew on the back of the stove, and kept the cabin clean and organized, despite the constant challenge of tracked-in snow and mud. Noah found himself adapting to their presence with surprising ease. The initial awkwardness of shared space had given way to comfortable familiarity, knowing when Thomas preferred silence for his work, recognizing Kate's habits and preferences, adjusting his own routine to accommodate their needs while still maintaining the ranch work that couldn't wait even in the depths of winter. More than that, Noah realized he had begun to anticipate their company rather than merely tolerating it. He found himself returning from outdoor tasks earlier than strictly necessary, drawn by the warmth and conversation awaiting him inside. In the evenings, he lingered by the fire, listening to Thomas read aloud or engaging in discussions that ranged from practical frontier matters to abstract philosophical questions the professor enjoyed posing. And then there was Kate. Noah couldn't deny his growing awareness of her as more than simply a guest in his home. He noticed the way sunlight caught her auburn hair when she stood by the window, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the competent grace of her movements as she worked. Small things, ordinary things, yet they affected him in ways both unfamiliar and increasingly welcome. One evening in late January, Thomas retired early, leaving Noah and Kate alone by the fire. A comfortable silence settled between them as Kate mended a shirt and Noah whittled a replacement handle for one of his tools. "May I ask you something, Noah?" Kate said finally, setting aside her sewing. He nodded, continuing his careful shaping of the wood. What was she like? Sarah. The question was gentle, tentative, as if she feared overstepping but needed to know. Noah's hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their work. In the past, such a direct question about Sarah would have caused him to withdraw completely. Now, he found himself considering his response rather than refusing outright. "Kind," he said after a moment, determined. Had a laugh that seemed too big for someone so small, used to echo right through you. A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. Wasn't afraid of anything except snakes. Those terrified her. Wouldn't go near the creek in summer without me checking for them first. Kate listened attentively, her eyes warm with interest rather than pity. "She sounds wonderful." She was, Noah agreed. Wasn't raised for frontier life, but took to it better than most who were. Never complained about the hardships. He paused, then added softly, "Deserved better than what happened to her." "No one deserves such loss," Kate said gently. "Neither Sarah and James, nor you." Noah looked up from his whittling, meeting her gaze across the firelit space between them. "For a long time thought maybe I did. Deserve it, I mean. Survived when they didn't. Felt like punishment for something." "And now?" Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah considered the question, surprised to find his answer had changed without his conscious awareness. "Now, Think maybe it was just life. Cruel sometimes for no reason. Not punishment, just what happened. Kate nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's a hard truth to accept. That sometimes there is no why, no reason that makes sense of our losses. You've had your share, Noah observed. It wasn't a question, but an acknowledgement of the shadow he sometimes glimpsed behind her steady competence. Yes, she agreed simply. Mother when I was 16. Then 2 years ago, my fiancé. This was new information, and Noah found himself unexpectedly tense at the mention of a man who had once been important to her. What happened? He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Kate's hands twisted in her lap, a rare display of discomfort from someone usually so composed. He changed. Or perhaps I finally saw who he truly was. Richard came from a prominent St. Louis family, very concerned with social position. When Father's health began to fail and our circumstances became strained, Richard's devotion proved conditional. Noah's jaw tightened. He abandoned you when you needed him. In essence, yes, Kate confirmed. He offered to continue our engagement, but only if I placed Father in a sanitarium, something Father dreaded and we couldn't afford regardless. When I refused, Richard made it clear that a wife with a sickly dependent wasn't what he had envisioned for his future. The quiet dignity with which she related this betrayal stirred a protective anger in Noah that surprised him with its intensity. Man like that doesn't deserve the title, he said gruffly. A small smile touched Kate's lips. That was essentially Father's assessment as well, though expressed with considerably more academic vocabulary. Noah returned to his whittling, processing this new information about Kate's past. It explained much about her fierce protection of her father, her determination to succeed in their frontier venture, the wariness he occasionally glimpsed beneath her openness. Coming west was as much about leaving those memories behind as it was about Father's health, Kate admitted. A chance to build something new, somewhere people wouldn't look at us with pity or speculation. Fresh starts, Noah murmured. That's what the West promises, anyway. And sometimes delivers, Kate added, her gaze meeting his with warmth that made his heart beat faster. I didn't expect to find such kindness here, Noah. You've given us so much more than shelter. Noah shook his head, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Given me something too, he said quietly. Reason to come home besides just having nowhere else to go. The words emerged before he could consider their implications, an honest admission of how profoundly her presence in Thomas's had changed his relationship to his own home. What had been merely shelter, a place to exist between days of work, had become something to anticipate, to appreciate anew through their eyes. Kate's expression softened with understanding, and something more warmth that mirrored his own growing feelings. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the fire-lit room, acknowledging without words the connection that had formed between them. Then Kate smiled and returned to her sewing, the silence between them now charged with shared awareness of the past that had shaped them both, and of the possible future neither had anticipated when their paths first crossed. February brought milder weather, with occasional days of brilliant sunshine that melted the snow on south-facing slopes and hinted at the eventual arrival of spring. On one such day, Noah suggested a ride to check on the cattle grazing in the sheltered valley beyond the ranch, inviting Kate to accompany him. I'd love to, she agreed readily. I've been cooped up so long I'm forgetting what the world looks like beyond our immediate surroundings. Our surroundings, Noah noted, not your surroundings. The casual possessive warmed him in a way the February sun could not, suggesting Kate had begun to consider the ranch partly her own space, a thought that pleased rather than alarmed him. They set out after breakfast, riding side by side where the trail permitted. Kate was a competent horsewoman, sitting her mount with the ease of someone raised around horses despite her city upbringing. She had exchanged her usual skirts for split riding clothes that Noah recognized as modified from an old pair of his trousers, practical frontier adaptation that many women embraced out of necessity. It's glorious, Kate exclaimed as they crested a rise overlooking the valley where Noah's small herd of cattle grazed on hay he had distributed earlier in the week. The landscape stretched before them, mountains rising in the distance, the valley itself a pristine expanse of white, broken only by the dark forms of the cattle and the winding line of a half-frozen creek. "One of my favorite views," Noah admitted, watching her face as she took in the scenery. "Worth the cold ride." "Worth far more," Kate agreed, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "I understand now why you chose this place, despite its isolation. It's magnificent." They dismounted to rest the horses, finding a sun-warmed rock outcropping that offered shelter from the wind. Noah spread a blanket he'd brought, and they sat side by side, sharing coffee from a thermos and jerky from Noah's saddlebag. "Sarah and I found this spot our first week here," Noah said, surprising himself with the voluntary mention of his late wife. "Knew then we'd made the right choice, despite how much work lay ahead." Kate listened attentively, encouraging without pressing when Noah spoke of the past. "You built something remarkable here, Noah. Most people would have given up after such loss, sold the ranch and moved on." Noah considered this, watching an eagle circle lazily over the valley below. "Thought about it," he admitted. "Those first months after, couldn't see the point in continuing. But this land—" He gestured to the vista before them. "It was our dream, Sarah's and mine. Selling it felt like betraying that. So you stayed, even though it hurt." "Stayed," Noah nodded, "but stopped living, really. Just existed. Worked the land, kept the cattle, went through the motions. Wasn't until—" He trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. "Until," Kate prompted gently. Noah looked at her then. Really looked at her, the woman who had somehow breached the walls around his heart without him noticing, until it was too late to rebuild them. "Until you and Thomas came," he finished quietly. "Reminded me there was more to life than just surviving it." Kate's eyes softened, her gloved hand moving to cover his where it rested on the blanket between them. "I think perhaps we've helped each other remember that," she said. "Father and I were adrift after leaving St. Louis, carrying our own hurts and disappointments. Your kindness gave us more than shelter, Noah. It gave us hope." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Noah was acutely aware of her hand on his, of the warmth in her eyes that matched the warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in 3 years, he felt the stirring of something he had thought forever lost, the desire to reach out, to connect, to risk his heart again. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, Noah leaned toward Kate. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened as she understood his intent. She met him halfway, her lips touching his in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper of contact. Noah pulled back, searching her face for any sign of regret or uncertainty. Finding none, only a shy smile that transformed her features, he kissed her again more firmly this time, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with careful tenderness. When they parted, Kate's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. Then she looked at him with such open affection that Noah felt something shift within him, the final thawing of a heart that had been frozen in grief for too long. "I didn't come west expecting to find you," Kate said softly, "but I'm very glad I did." "Makes two of us," Noah replied, his voice rough with emotion, "though I wasn't looking at all." Kate smiled, understanding his meaning. "Sometimes what we need finds us, even when we're determined to need nothing and no one." They remained on the outcropping until the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, talking of small things and large ones, of hopes tentatively rekindled and possibilities neither had dared consider before this moment. The ride back to the ranch passed in comfortable silence, both processing the significant shift in their relationship. As they approached the cabin, lights already glowing warmly in the windows against the gathering dusk, Noah reached over to touch Kate's arm, halting her before they came within view of the house. "Don't want to rush this," he said earnestly, "or pressure you in any way. Living under the same roof, it's complicated." Kate nodded, appreciating his concern. "It is. But I think we're both cautious people by nature, Noah. Neither of us enters into commitments lightly, especially after what we've each experienced." "True enough," he acknowledged. "Just want you to know I respect you, Kate, and Thomas. Don't want either of you feeling uncomfortable in what's become your home, too." Her smile at his words, "your home, too," warmed him against the evening chill. "We'll navigate this carefully," she promised, "together." Inside, Thomas greeted them with enthusiasm, eager to hear about their excursion and share his own productive day of writing. If he noticed the subtle change between them, the way Noah's eyes lingered on Kate, or how she smiled more readily, he gave no indication, though Noah suspected little escaped the professor's observant gaze. That night, as Noah lay in bed reviewing the day's events, he found himself experiencing an emotion so long absent he barely recognized it: happiness. Not the uncomplicated joy of his life before tragedy, but a more complex, hard-won contentment that acknowledged pain while embracing possibility. His hand found the St. Christopher medallion still hanging around his neck, the silver warm from contact with his skin. Kate's gift had become a talisman of sorts, a physical reminder of the connection between them that had grown from simple neighborly assistance to something far more profound. For the first time in 3 years, Noah fell asleep thinking not of what he had lost, but of what he might yet find a second chance at love, at family, at a life fully lived rather than merely endured. March arrived with hints of the coming spring, longer days, warming temperatures, and the occasional sound of melting snow dripping from the cabin's eaves. The change of seasons brought with it practical considerations for the Morgans, whose temporary winter arrangement at Noah's ranch would soon need reassessment. One evening after dinner, as the three of them sat by the fire engaged in their usual pursuits, Thomas writing in his journal, Kate mending, and Noah carving a small wooden horse, Thomas broached the subject directly. "With spring approaching," he said, setting aside his writing, "Katherine and I should begin planning our return to our own cabin. The trail will be passable within a few weeks, I imagine." Noah's hand stilled on his carving, a sharp pang of loss piercing him at the thought of the Morgans leaving. These past months of shared living had transformed his existence, filling his days with conversation and purpose beyond mere survival. The prospect of returning to solitude, to a silent house emptied of their presence, was suddenly unbearable. "No rush," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Trail will be muddy for weeks yet. Safer to wait until it's properly dried out." Kate's eyes met his across the room, understanding and what appeared to be relief in her gaze. "Father, there's no need to make decisions immediately," she said. "Noah's right about the conditions. Early spring travel can be treacherous." Thomas looked between them, his academic's perception missing nothing of the unspoken communication. "True enough," he agreed mildly, "though I wouldn't want to impose on Noah's hospitality longer than necessary." "Not an imposition," Noah said firmly. "Place feels right with people in it again." The admission cost him something in vulnerability, but the smile Kate gave him in response made it worthwhile. Thomas, too, seemed pleased by the sentiment, though a thoughtful expression crossed his features as he regarded them. "Nevertheless," the older man said after a moment, "Katherine and I must eventually re-establish ourselves at our own property. The garden will need preparation, repairs must be completed before next winter, and I've committed to beginning lessons for the children of Pinecrest once travel becomes reliable." Noah nodded, acknowledging the practical truth of Thomas's words while still resisting the inevitable separation they implied. Over the winter months, the Morgans had become essential to him, Thomas, with his books and ideas, his patient explanations of concepts Noah had never encountered, his stories of the wider world beyond Wyoming Territory, and Kate, whose presence had awakened Noah's heart from its long dormancy, reminding him that life could hold joy as well as sorrow. Later that night, after Thomas had retired, Noah and Kate lingered by the fire. Their relationship had developed cautiously over the weeks since that first kiss in the mountains, quiet moments of connection, conversations that deepened their understanding of each other, and an increasing certainty that what they felt was no temporary attachment, but something with the potential to last. "Father's right about returning to our cabin," Kate said softly, moving to sit beside Noah on the bench he had crafted years ago for quiet evenings with Sarah. "We can't impose on you indefinitely." Never thought of it as imposing, Noah replied, taking her hand in his. Been thinking, actually, that I don't want you to leave at all. Kate's eyes widened slightly at this direct statement. Noah? He took a deep breath, gathering courage for words he'd never expected to speak again after Sarah's death. I know it hasn't been long, probably seems sudden to you, but these months together, they've shown me what I want for the rest of my life. And that's you, Kate, you and Thomas here, making this place a home again. Are you? Kate hesitated, hope and caution mingled in her expression. Noah, are you proposing? Doing it badly, probably, he admitted with a rueful smile. Been a long time since I courted anyone. But yes, I'm asking you to stay, to be my wife, if you'll have me. Kate's free hand moved to her mouth, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I never expected this, she whispered. When we came west, when Father's health was failing and our prospects seemed so limited, I'd resigned myself to a life focused solely on his care. I never thought to find someone like you. Is that a yes? Noah asked, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Kate's smile broke through her tears like sunshine through rain. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, Noah Young, I will marry you. Noah raised her hand to his lips, kissing it with reverence, before drawing her closer for a proper kiss, one that sealed their promise and expressed what words could not fully convey. When they parted, Kate rested her head against his shoulder, their hands still entwined. Father will be pleased, she said after a moment. He's grown quite fond of you, you know. Says you have a natural philosopher's mind, asking the right questions even without formal education. Noah chuckled, warmed by Thomas's approval. High praise from a professor, though I suspect he might have concerns about you marrying a simple rancher. Not at all, Kate assured him. Father values character above social position. His academic colleagues thought him quite radical for it. Besides, he's observed how you treat me, how you've cared for both of us. That matters far more to him than credentials or background. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and contemplating the future they would build together. Noah felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that he had thought forever beyond his reach after losing Sarah and James. It wasn't a replacement for what he had lost. Nothing could ever be that, but rather a new chapter, unexpected yet increasingly precious. What are you thinking? Kate asked, noting his thoughtful expression. Noah considered his answer carefully. Thinking that Sarah would approve, he said finally. She always said life was for living, even when it hurt. Took me 3 years to understand what she meant. Kate squeezed his hand, understanding the significance of this acknowledgement. And now? Now I'm ready to live again, Noah replied simply. With you. The following morning, they shared their news with Thomas over breakfast. The older man's face broke into a broad smile as Kate, blushing slightly, explained Noah's proposal and her acceptance. Wonderful news, Thomas exclaimed, reaching across the table to shake Noah's hand firmly. Though I can't pretend to be entirely surprised, I've observed the growing attachment between you these past months with great interest. You're not concerned? Kate asked, knowing how protective her father could be despite his progressive ideas. Thomas shook his head emphatically. My dear, I've had the privilege of watching Noah Young transform from a man entombed in grief to one embracing life again, largely through your influence. What father could object to a man who has demonstrated such capacity for growth, such depth of character? Noah ducked his head, uncomfortable with such direct praise, yet moved by Thomas's approval. Still plenty of rough edges, he said modestly. As have we all, Thomas replied with a dismissive wave. The question is not whether a man is perfect, but whether he strives to be better today than he was yesterday. By that measure, you've proven yourself abundantly worthy of my daughter's hand. The conversation turned to practical matters: when and where the wedding might take place, how they would manage the 2 properties, and what role Thomas would play in their new family configuration. I won't intrude on your married life, Thomas insisted. Perhaps I should establish myself in town once my teaching begins. Reverend Mitchell mentioned rooms above the church that might be suitable. Absolutely not, Noah said firmly, surprising both Morgans with his vehemence. This is your home now too, Thomas. Place is plenty big enough for all of us. Kate's eyes shone with gratitude at Noah's immediate and unequivocal inclusion of her father in their plans. Noah's right, Father. We want you here with us. Thomas appeared deeply moved by their insistence. Well, he said, his voice slightly unsteady, if you're certain I won't be in the way. Family belongs together, Noah stated simply, the words emerging from a place of conviction he hadn't known he still possessed. That's what this place was built for. In the weeks that followed, preparations for both spring and the wedding occupied the household. Noah and Kate rode to town together to share their news, receiving congratulations from the townspeople who had watched Noah's slow emergence from isolation with quiet approval. Reverend Mitchell agreed to perform the ceremony in early May, when the wildflowers would be blooming on the hillsides and travel would be easy enough for those townspeople who wished to attend. Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife, insisted on organizing a proper celebration, declaring that Pinecrest had seen too little joy in recent years to let such an occasion pass without commemoration. Meanwhile, Noah and Kate, accompanied by Thomas when his health permitted, made several trips to the Morgan cabin to assess its condition after the winter and to retrieve belongings they would need. The structure had weathered the season well, thanks to Noah's repairs, though it would require some attention before it could be used as a secondary residence during the summer months when Thomas planned to teach in town. April brought the full awakening of the land from winter's grip. The snow retreated to shaded hollows and high slopes, wildflowers appeared in sheltered meadows, and the creek that ran through Noah's property swelled with meltwater from the mountains. The air filled with the sounds of returning birds and the fresh scents of new growth. Noah found himself experiencing the season with new awareness, seeing the beauty of the awakening land through Kate's appreciative eyes. She delighted in each sign of spring, from the first crocuses pushing through the remaining snow to the return of the red-winged blackbirds to the marshy area near the creek. One afternoon, as they walked together along the creek checking for winter damage to the irrigation channels Noah had built, Kate paused to watch a pair of mountain bluebirds flitting among the willows. "I've never seen such vivid blue," she marveled. "It's as if they've captured a piece of the sky." Noah, watching her rather than the birds, was struck by how fully she had integrated herself into his world. Where Sarah had adapted to frontier life with determined good humor, Kate seemed to embrace it with genuine passion, finding beauty and meaning in details many would overlook. "You truly love it here," he observed, not quite a question. Kate turned to him, her face alight with the simple joy of the moment. "I do," she confirmed. "When we first arrived, I was focused solely on Father's health and our survival. I didn't have the luxury of appreciating our surroundings. But now," she gestured to the landscape around them, "now I see why you never left, even after such loss. This land gets into your soul." Noah nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "It was the main reason I stayed," he admitted. "Couldn't bear to leave this place, even when everything else in me wanted to run from the memories." Kate stepped closer, taking his hand in hers. "I'm glad you stayed, Noah, not just for selfish reasons, though I can't imagine my life now if we hadn't met, but because this land needs people who love it, who understand its value beyond mere possession." Noah squeezed her hand, once again struck by how perfectly she articulated feelings he had never fully put into words. "We'll build something good here," he promised. "Together." The last week of April brought final preparations for the wedding. Kate, with Mrs. Peterson's assistance, altered a dress that had belonged to the shopkeeper's daughter, who had married and moved to Cheyenne the previous year. Noah, under Thomas's discreet guidance, purchased a new shirt and had his best trousers pressed by Mrs. Lambert, the doctor's wife. The ranch itself required preparation for the guests who would attend the ceremony and celebration. Noah and Thomas constructed additional seating from lumber Noah had been saving for barn repairs, while Kate planned a simple but abundant feast featuring venison, ham, and early spring vegetables from both the ranch's root cellar and contributions from neighbors. The evening before the wedding, as Noah completed last-minute repairs to the corral fence, Thomas joined him, moving more easily now that the warm weather had eased the strain on his lungs. "May I have a word, Noah?" the older man asked, his manner more formal than usual. Noah set aside his hammer, giving Thomas his full attention. "Of course." Thomas cleared his throat, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wanted to express my gratitude," he began. "Not just for your generosity in opening your home to us, but for the happiness you've brought to Katherine. After her disappointment with Richard, I feared she might never trust enough to love again." Noah nodded, understanding the depth of feeling behind Thomas's carefully chosen words. "Kate's done the same for me," he said simply, "given me back a future I thought was gone for good." "Yes," Thomas agreed, his academic's precision finding the heart of the matter. "You've both helped each other heal. It's a rare and precious foundation for a marriage." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the western mountains with gold and crimson. Then, Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I've been saving this," he said, extending it to Noah. "It was Katherine's mother's wedding ring. I'd intended it for her first marriage, but when Richard proved unworthy—" He shook his head slightly. "Well, I'm glad now that circumstances unfolded as they did, leading her to someone truly deserving of both the ring and the woman who will wear it." Noah accepted the box with reverence, opening it to reveal a simple gold band engraved with a delicate pattern of intertwined leaves. "It's beautiful," he said honestly. "But are you sure? Must be a family heirloom." "Precisely why it belongs on my daughter's hand when she marries a man worthy of becoming family," Thomas replied firmly. "Elizabeth would have approved of you, Noah. She valued character above all else, a trait Katherine inherited from her." Deeply moved, Noah carefully closed the box and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Thank you, Thomas. I'll treasure it and Kate as they deserve." The older man smiled, clasping Noah's shoulder briefly before turning back toward the house. "I know you will, son. That's why I can give her to you tomorrow with a glad heart." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and early wildflowers across the ranch. By mid-morning, wagons and riders began arriving townspeople from Pinecrest and neighboring ranchers with whom Noah had maintained cautious business relationships even during his years of isolation. The ceremony would take place in the large clearing beside the cabin, where Thomas and Noah had arranged benches facing an arch constructed of young aspen trunks and decorated with pine boughs and the first wildflowers of the season. Reverend Mitchell arrived early, bringing his wife and a small pump organ that 4 men carefully unloaded from their wagon and positioned near the arch. Noah spent the morning in a state of contained anticipation, greeting guests and directing them to the seating area, while steadfastly avoiding the cabin where Kate was preparing with the assistance of Mrs. Peterson and several other women from town. Thomas moved between the two groups, resplendent in his best suit and clearly relishing his role as father of the bride. As noon approached the hour they had chosen for the ceremony, Noah changed into his wedding clothes in the barn, his movements deliberate as he buttoned his new shirt and secured his freshly polished boots. The St. Christopher medallion Kate had given him months ago remained around his neck, a reminder of how their connection had begun. When he emerged, Thomas was waiting to escort him to the arch where Reverend Mitchell stood ready. The guests had taken their seats, an unexpectedly large gathering that reminded Noah how a community could come together even for someone who had held himself apart for so long. "Ready?" Thomas asked, studying Noah's face with paternal concern. Noah nodded, surprised to find himself calm rather than nervous. "More ready than I've been for anything in a long time," he replied honestly. They took their places before the arch, and Mrs. Mitchell began playing a hymn on the organ, the music carrying clearly in the mountain air. The assembled guests rose and turned toward the cabin, where the door had opened to reveal Kate on her father's arm. Noah's breath caught at the sight of her. The altered dress suited her perfectly, its simple lines emphasizing her natural grace. She wore her hair partly up with small white flowers woven into the auburn strands and carried a bouquet of early wildflowers gathered that morning from the hillside. But it was her expression that truly captured him, the radiant joy in her face as their eyes met across the clearing, the certainty in her step as she and Thomas began their walk toward him. In that moment, Noah felt the last remnants of his grief-imposed isolation fall away, replaced by a gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. As Kate reached him, Thomas placed her hand in Noah's with quiet dignity, then stepped aside to allow them to face each other before Reverend Mitchell. The minister spoke of commitment and love, of building a life together with God's blessing, but Noah barely registered the familiar words. His attention was fixed on Kate, the warmth in her eyes, the slight trembling of her hand in his, the miracle of her presence in his life. When the time came for the ring, Noah withdrew the box Thomas had given him. Kate's eyes widened in recognition as he slipped her mother's ring onto her finger. A perfect fit that seemed to symbolize how completely she had become part of his life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Mitchell declared, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Noah had discussed this moment with Kate beforehand, explaining his reservation about the traditional ending of the ceremony. For 3 years, he hadn't smiled not once since burying Sarah, and James had his face formed that expression of joy. The thought of forcing it now, even for their wedding, had troubled him. Kate had understood, assuring him that she wanted only his genuine emotions, not performances for the sake of tradition or appearances. "When you smile again," she had told him, "I want it to be real, not because custom demands it." Now, as they stood declared husband and wife before their community, Kate reached up to touch his cheek gently, her eyes full of love and acceptance. Then, rising on tiptoe, she pressed a kiss not to his lips as expected, but to his brow, a gesture so tender, so full of understanding and promise, that something long frozen within Noah finally thawed completely. Without conscious decision, his lips curved upward, forming a smile that transformed his face, not the forced grimace he had feared, but a genuine expression of the joy that had been building within him for months. Kate's eyes widened as she witnessed the change, her own smile growing in response. "There you are," she whispered, for his ears alone. "I've been waiting to meet this Noah." The celebration that followed was more joyous than Noah could have imagined. Tables laden with food, music from those who had brought instruments, children playing games in the spring sunshine, all of it unfolded around them as they received congratulations from the community that had respected Noah's grief for 3 years, and now welcomed his return to life with genuine pleasure. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, Noah found a quiet moment with Kate away from the festivities, drawing her toward the small rise behind the cabin where they could see both the celebration below and the mountains beyond. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. Kate leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Completely," she assured him, "though I'm still marveling at that smile. I didn't realize how I'd been waiting to see it until it appeared." Noah chuckled, the sound as rusty as his smile, but equally genuine. "Wasn't planning it," he admitted. "Just happened. Something about that kiss." Kate turned in his arms to face him, her expression curious. "Why did it affect you so deeply? I know it wasn't the traditional wedding kiss, but—" "Reminded me of something," Noah explained, his voice softening with the memory. "Night before James got sick, he had a nightmare. Sarah sat with him, kissed his forehead just like you did mine, told him everything would be all right." He paused, his throat tightening. "Wasn't all right, not for a long time. But now I think maybe it will be." Kate's eyes filled with tears at this confidence, understanding the profound trust he had placed in her by sharing such a vulnerable memory. "It will be," she promised, reaching up to touch his face where the smile had appeared. "Not without hardship or sorrows life never is, but we'll face them together and find joy between the difficult moments." Noah kissed her then, drawing her close as the setting sun bathed them in golden light. Below, their guests continued the celebration, while before them stretched the mountains and valleys that would frame their life together, a life Noah had once thought forever beyond his reach. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair when they finally parted. for bringing me back to life, for helping me find my smile again." Kate smiled up at him, her face alight with love and promise. "We brought each other back," she corrected gently, "and this is just the beginning." Hand in hand, they returned to their wedding celebration, to the community that had witnessed their joining, and to the future they would build together on the land Noah had preserved through his darkest days, a future neither could have imagined when a woman with auburn hair first entered a general store and a grieving rancher offered help to strangers who would become his family. 5 years later, Noah stood on the porch of the ranch house, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, watching the summer sunset paint the mountains with familiar glory. Behind him, through the open door, came the sounds of evening routine. Kate's voice as she told a story to their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth. Thomas's deeper tones as he discussed a book with their oldest 4-year-old James Thomas, and the occasional gurgle from baby Matthew, not yet a year old, secure in his grandfather's arms. The ranch had prospered during these years of renewed purpose. Additional cattle, an expanded garden, new outbuildings, and careful management had transformed it from a solitary man's subsistence operation to a thriving family enterprise. The Morgan cabin served as a summer residence when Thomas taught in Pinecrest, and occasionally as a retreat when Noah and Kate needed time alone, rare but precious moments in their busy lives. As the last light faded from the peaks, Noah heard the door open behind him. Kate's arms slipped around his waist, her head resting between his shoulder blades in a familiar gesture of affection. "Beautiful evening," she observed, moving to stand beside him. Noah smiled, an expression that came easily now after 5 years of practice, and drew her closer. "Beautiful life," he corrected gently. Kate nodded against his shoulder, understanding all that remained unspoken in those 2 simple words: the gratitude for what they had built together, the acknowledgement of both joy and sorrow woven into the fabric of their shared existence, the recognition that happiness, once reclaimed, required tending like any valuable crop. "Father's agreed to watch the children overnight tomorrow," she mentioned casually. "I thought we might ride to the valley, perhaps stay at the line cabin." Noah's arm tightened around her waist, appreciating both the suggestion and the thoughtfulness behind it. 5 years of marriage and 3 children had done nothing to diminish their desire for each other's company, though opportunities for uninterrupted time together had become rare treasures. "Been too long since we had a night to ourselves," he agreed, turning to kiss her temple. "Think Thomas can handle all 3 of them?" Kate laughed softly. "Mrs. Peterson has volunteered to help. She claims grandmothering by proxy right since we've provided her with the only small children in walking distance of her store." Noah chuckled, picturing the shopkeeper's wife, who had appointed herself honorary grandmother to their brood, appearing regularly with small treats and handmade gifts. Like many in Pinecrest, she had embraced the young family as the embodiment of frontier possibility, life continuing, despite hardship, joy reclaimed from the ashes of sorrow. "Then it's settled," he said, already anticipating the rare luxury of Kate's undivided attention. "We'll leave after breakfast." They stood together in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared above the mountains, each reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from strangers meeting in a general store to partners sharing a life neither had thought possible when they first encountered each other. "I still have it, you know," Noah said quietly, his hand moving to the spot beneath his shirt where the St. Christopher medallion rested against his chest. "Never take it off." Kate smiled, understanding the significance of the talisman that had marked the beginning of their connection. "It served its purpose well," she observed, guiding a traveler safely home. "Home," Noah repeated, the word rich with meaning as he gazed at the ranch house glowing with lamplight, sheltering the family they had created together. "Never thought I'd find it again after losing Sarah and James. Thought that part of my life was over for good." "And now?" Kate asked, though she knew the answer from the contentment in his voice, the ease in his posture, the smile that came readily to his face these days. Noah turned to her, framing her face between his hands with gentle reverence. "Now I know home isn't just a place," he said softly. It's the people who bring you back to yourself when you've lost your way. The ones who see who you really are, even when you've forgotten. Kate leaned into his touch, her eyes reflecting the starlight and something deeper, the understanding that comes from building a life with someone through both joy and sorrow. "I love you, Noah Young," she said simply, "every day more than the last." "And I love you, Kate Young," he replied, the name still bringing him quiet pleasure after 5 years. "For bringing my smile back when I thought it was gone forever." Their kiss was unhurried, deep with the familiarity of years shared and the promise of years to come, a testament to healing that neither had thought possible when fate first brought them together in a Wyoming Territory winter. Behind them, their children's laughter mingled with Thomas's deeper chuckle, the sounds of family drifting out into the gathering night, anchoring them to the present while honoring all that had brought them to this moment of hard-won happiness. Together, they turned back toward the warmth of their home, toward the family waiting within. Toward the future, they continued to build day by day on foundations of shared strength and enduring love. The legacy of a woman who had kissed a grieving man's brow and helped him find his smile again.